And we're going to look at tangible tools and strategies for developing confidence and resilience for our GCSE maths learners. So I'm going to break this down into 3 main sections. So there's lots of different aspects to the research work. We've got all these different pieces that fit together. So I'm going to look at a bit of background, some of the actual research that's carried out. So looking at how I've completed the research using surveys and so on. And I'm going to look at what was actually created, what I actually did, and then briefly some results. The main focus is going to be on what I actually did, because I think that's the most useful. Really important. I had support to be able to do this research. We don't do things alone, especially successful things. This was really important for me. This particular person was absolutely brilliant. So I think we definitely need to acknowledge that. Okay, so this is what we're looking at, something tangible. So this is something that we can get hold of, something we can take into the classroom and say, I'm going to use this. And then strategies, this is how I'm going to use it. This is how I'm going to do it. So we're looking at, can we get something positive out of this? So we start with the background, working in the Northwest, working with GCSE research students. Our policy is very aspirational. So if you've got an entry 3 or above, then you're doing GCSE. We're not expecting you to go from an entry 3 to a grade 4. We're expecting 1 grade's progress in 1 academic year. Now, none of our students start their course with the aim of failing it, but some of them do expect that that is what will happen. So we have to try and step in and change that expectation. So this is where we are. Looking at the deprivation index for Lancashire, we've got a nice dark blue there. So very basically, the darker the colour, the higher the level of deprivation. And that's where our student cohort is coming from. So if we look at the student cohort a bit more, I want to point out this is not a photograph of my students. Okay, so this is representative of the characteristics of GCSE students who are doing resit in FE. They view themselves as failures. So this is a common characteristic. If we look at some more of the common characteristics that have been described about this student group, this is how they're described. So lacking confidence, poor attendance, lacking focus. This doesn't apply to every student by any means. However, it is the description that's quite often used. So it's okay to acknowledge that description and to acknowledge those characteristics, but then what are we actually going to do about that? Are we going to say, well, we know about it and carry on as normal, like we've always done? Or are we going to try and do something different? So we start to do some research. So this is the research process that I used. This is the timeline, basically, that I went through. So I started off with a survey just to get a baseline at the beginning. I created the resources that I wanted to use that I thought would have some impact. I used them. I did another survey to check midway, conducted a focus group midway, and then I reused the tools that I'd created when we got to the end of the course as revision and completed an evaluative survey at the end. The survey was more or less the same all the way through, just 1 or 2 questions different so that I could compare the information that I'd got. So if we look into that research process a bit more, I did the 3 surveys and I was asking students to comment on things like their level of confidence, used a star rating, used questions where they ticked off which resources they liked, so that it was more user-friendly. Asked them to comment on their progress and basically to evaluate the maths classes that they were in. For the focus group, The results were really, really enlightening. So listening to those students talking about their experiences in maths class, how they felt about their maths, that was really, really useful. They really surprised me with some of the things that they said. If we look a little bit more in depth here, the surprise that they felt when they got something right. If you remember that my classes, the students that I've researched with, are all the students below a grade 3. So these are all grade 1s and 2s. So we're expecting them at the highest to get a grade 3 at the end of the year. So some of the terminology was a surprise, but the depth that they provided was really interesting. Especially right in the middle here, the idea that if you got something right, you were more inclined to go on and try another question or a harder question. So success breeding success. Just looking at the word frequency in the focus group, the 3 most common words were think, feel, and can. As a maths teacher, seeing can in the biggest letters was brilliant. Instead of seeing can't or can't do or don't know, can, that was great. So if we move on to what I actually did, so these are the actual tools. I started off making success slips for individual skills with no context at all. So I am simply asking the question, can you do this? Can you find the square of 8, the square of 9, the square of 11? Can you find the square of a number? Can you identify a prime number? Can you work out the angle on a straight line? Can you do that or not? So no context, no repeated procedure or multi-procedures to be able to work out the answers to a question. They're simply looking at one skill or one element of knowledge. And then we collect them together. So we're not doing 6 of these in a lesson, we're doing 1, we might do 2. In this particular example, really early on, this student did 2 slips for identifying a prime number. So she did it the first time and questioned whether 2 was a prime number. Once she found out she was correct, that 2 was a prime number, she did another slip. So she went and got another slip and identified 2 more prime numbers. And she didn't throw the first one away because it showed that progression. So the idea of using these slips for other things, to demonstrate other things, that came about. So collecting them all together evidences these are the things that you can do. Because we focus so much on the things you can't do, here is tangible evidence, actual proof of the things that you can do. So here, the student has got the answer wrong. So they're working on a ratio and they're struggling. But they're only struggling with that one aspect, and there is nothing to complicate what they're doing. So they can now go back through and work on it until it's correct, which they did. But they didn't have to address that as part of a series of steps to answer a question, and they didn't have to focus on any context or disentangle the numbers from the question. It was simply, can you calculate? Can you do it? One of the other tools that I worked on was an emoji slip. I've got to put my hands up and say, this is not my invention, okay? I cannot take credit for having created this in any way. This is somebody else's research that I've seen and I thought was great, and I thought, how can I use that? So I have to definitely say so. The emoji slip is not to check the student's progress in terms of their ability or their success. This only asks them how they rate their confidence and how they feel. So they rate their confidence at the start of the lesson with a particular subject. So let's say negative numbers. And then at the end of the lesson, they rate it again. So have we progressed in terms of how we feel, how confident we feel with that subject? I also looked at making very small versions of bigger tasks and simple versions of bigger tasks. So this is designed to be done in about 3 minutes. This is not, you know, a massive part of the lesson. This is a very small part of the lesson, as are all of the other tools that go with it. So a very small task. Once that small task is completed, we've got a visual representation of success. You've completed it, therefore you were successful. So I kept using those tools through the academic year. I also use strategies in terms of confidence raising, but I'm not going to go through each one because the time constraint wouldn't allow that. And I don't think my voice would hold out, really. So I'm just going to look at one here, pointing out, number one, pointing out where an assessment strategy can be implemented in a classwork task. I want to prepare those students for an assessment at the end of the year. Knowing that they are being prepared helps them to feel prepared. So I'm telling you that I'm preparing you by pointing out that every time you do a worksheet, you can use the same strategy to practice on that worksheet as you do when you do an assessment paper. So don't start at the beginning and work to the end. Pick out all the questions that look easier and do those first, just like I would ask you to do in an exam. So that's just one strategy. Some of these strategies are aimed at confidence raising and safety, like strategy 9 here. So where we can give an answer safely without feeling uncomfortable. Some are aimed at raising positivity, like strategy 6 here. So giving a positive rather than a negative instruction. Don't tell a student something that you don't want them to do, because that's what they will do. So tell them what you do want them to do. Indicating where their confidence is raised, so pointing that out. So you've just done this task, it's brilliant, you've managed to get this part of the task right, well done, you're feeling more confident. What else can we do now? At the end of the process, I looked at how I can reuse the work that I've completed. So I changed all the numbers and put the slips together to create revision sheets. So now we're revising those single individual skills. And finally, I went back to the survey and looked at what sort of impact we'd had in a more quantitative way, I suppose. So looking at rating a couple of the particular tools. So the success slips, 3 or more stars, 71% there. Emoji slips, 67% on 3 or more stars. Interesting that all of the other resources, the different types of resources in the classroom, the highest was 42% for 3 or more stars. So I thought that was really quite positive. These were the 3 main questions that related to confidence, progress, resilience. So looking at the level of confidence, we've gone from 32 to 87. Making progress, 38 to 82. How much do you like maths? 42 to 67. No guarantee there that that would improve at all, that that would increase at all. And it hasn't increased massively on none of these numbers. Am I saying 95%? However, we are seeing some improvement. And hopefully, I can build on that improvement. Thank you.